The blade was already at my throat when I understood I was not afraid of it. That is the strange thing about the moment you have been waiting your whole life to be tested. It does not feel like fear. It feels like arithmetic. King Dimitri's arm did not shake. Mine did not either, and that seemed to trouble him more than anything I had said all night. Behind him, on the dais he was not supposed to leave, Halvar sat with his hands flat on the arms of his throne, knuckles white, and did not move, because I had made him promise he would not. Somewhere above the circle, a wolf that was not fully a wolf anymore made a sound I had never heard it make before. I did not know yet if I would win. I only knew that if I lost, I would lose it standing up. Cut the blade there. Let me tell you how I got to that circle. It started 3 weeks before any of it, on the morning I was traded like a bolt of good cloth to a man I had not yet learned to fear. I was 22, a healer's apprentice from the river villages, and the treaty that ended 40 years of border killing between my people and the Iron Territories had my name written into its very last clause in ink that was not yet dry when they told me. A human bride, to prove the wolves could keep peace with something soft. I did not choose it. I chose, instead, what I would be once I arrived, and that has made all the difference in every telling of this since. I noticed the fortress before I noticed him, grey stone going black with old rain, smoke over the wall like a held breath. Then I noticed the man at the top of the steps, and understood at once why 40 years of killing had needed a king this size to end it. Halvar wore his authority the way other men wore coats they had forgotten they had on. The whole courtyard rearranged itself around where he stood, without him appearing to notice it did. He looked at me the way a man looks at a document he has already decided is a formality. "This is her," he said, to no one, and it was the first time in my life a sentence had made me feel smaller and more furious in the same breath. His wolf did not agree with him. I saw it before he did. Something moved behind his eyes, some animal weight shifting forward, and for exactly 1/2 of 1 second, the king of the Iron Territories looked like a man who had been struck somewhere he could not name. Then it was gone, and he was giving orders about my trunks, and I decided I had imagined it. I had not imagined it. I would spend 3 weeks learning that. The hall that night was long and loud and entirely uninterested in me, which suited me fine. I was given a seat far below the salt, beside a healer named Godwin, who smelled of dried yarrow and did not bother pretending my presence was anything but political theatre. I did not mind. I have never needed to be wanted by a room to survive it. What I minded was the wolf. Halvar's second, a broad, quiet man named Edric, told me later that a king's wolf does not simply notice a mate. It commits, all at once, the way water commits to falling. Halvar's had committed the moment I stepped down from that wagon, and Halvar himself had spent 3 weeks refusing to hear a word it said. I found this out the hard way, in the library, 9 days after I arrived. I had gone looking for anything on wolfsbane cultivation. Godwin's texts were older than the treaty, and half of them were rotted past reading, and found instead a room warmer than any other in that stone house, and Halvar, alone, reading by a fire that had clearly been lit for one. He looked up. He did not look pleased. "You should not be here," he said. And yet, I did not move. His jaw worked once before he found the rest of it. "This wing is mine. So is the whole fortress, as I understand it, and yet somehow I have to sleep somewhere in it." I picked up the book nearest my hand, mostly to have something to do with my eyes. You could simply tell me where the good texts on plant toxicity are kept, and I would trouble your wing considerably less. Something crossed his face that I would later learn to recognize as amusement fighting a war it usually lost. He did not smile. But he told me, and it was the correct shelf, and that was the first time I understood that being underestimated by this man was going to be a long and complicated project. I did not yet know his wound. I only knew that a king who ran a kingdom with total, unbothered authority went strange and careful the moment I was in a room with him, as though some part of him were bracing for weather only he could feel coming. I tested that theory more than once in the days that followed, mostly because I have never been able to leave a puzzle alone once I have noticed its edges. I took to reading in his library at the same hour most evenings, not by invitation, simply by refusing to be told it was closed to me. He tolerated this the way a man tolerates a draft he has decided not to mention. Twice he left before I arrived. Once he stayed and read across from me for the better part of an hour without either of us saying a word, and I found I did not mind the silence at all, which unsettled me considerably more than if he had been unbearable company. The court noticed before I did, in the way courts notice everything, sideways, over wine, in tones meant to be overheard. It was at the autumn gathering, 12 days in, that the noticing became a problem. I had gone still at the edge of the hall, watching the dancing, when the wine hit me wrong, a hard, cold wave through my chest that dropped me half onto a bench before I caught myself. Godwin was there in a breath, pressing 2 fingers to my wrist, and Halvar was there faster than that. Close enough that I felt the heat coming off him before I felt his hand not quite touch my shoulder. "She is only human," he said to Godwin, not to me, as though I had become furniture the moment I swayed. "She was not bred for this cold. She cannot even stand through one autumn feast." I have been called many things. Weak had never been one of them, and I found, sitting on that bench with my pulse still uneven, that I intended to correct the record. "I can stand," I said, and stood, and the room went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when it has decided to enjoy someone's humiliation. I simply chose not to, for one moment, out of courtesy to the floor. Godwin's mouth did something complicated. Halvar's did not move at all, but I saw the exact instant his wolf disagreed with him again. A flicker behind his eyes, like a door opening onto a room he refused to enter. Word travels fast in a stone hall with too much time on its hands. By morning, half the court believed their king had married a woman who fainted at feasts, and one man in that court was delighted to hear it. King Dmitri of the Vishenko wolves arrived 4 days later under a banner of false courtesy, ostensibly to discuss border grain rights. He was lean where Halvar was broad, and he smiled with his whole face in a way that told you immediately not to trust any part of it. "The famous bride," he said, over the welcome cup, looking at me the way a man looks at a horse he suspects has been sold to him lame. I confess I expected someone more. Durable, I hear you dropped like a felled tree at your own husband's feast. "I hear the border grain dispute has cost your pack 3 granaries this year," I said. "So I suppose we are both walking in on reputations that outrun the truth." His smile did not falter, which told me more than if it had. That night, my wine tasted of something bitter beneath the sweetness. Some dark note Godwin's training had taught me to distrust on instinct alone. I set the cup down before I drank the second swallow, and by the time Godwin confirmed what my own tongue had already told me, a slow-acting toxin, the kind that would have dropped me in the night looking like nothing but a weak woman's weak heart, Dmitri had already left the hall, unbothered, smiling at everyone he passed. He had nearly killed me to prove a story that was not even true, and if he had succeeded, it would have looked like exactly what he had told the whole court to expect. Halvar's face, when Godwin told him, was the stillest I had ever seen it. It was not a calm stillness. It was the stillness of a man standing very carefully on top of something enormous. "He will not touch her again," Halvar said, in a voice I had not heard him use before, low enough that I felt it more than heard it. I did not tell him then that I had already decided the same thing, for myself, in my own name. Something in this house did not add up, and it took me another handful of days, sitting alone in that same warm library, waiting on nothing, restless in a way I did not examine too closely, to find it. I was not looking for his letters, I was looking for a book on antidotes. But the drawer beneath it stuck, and when it finally gave, it gave all at once, and what fell out was not a book. It was a log, in his own hand, dated back to the week I arrived, Every meal I had eaten, tested and noted, every guard rotation near my door doubled without my knowledge. A letter, unsent, to a healer 3 territories away, asking after symptoms of exactly the toxin that had nearly taken me, written a full 6 days before Dmitri ever set foot in this hall, because Halvar had suspected him from the very first insult, and had been quietly building a wall around me the entire time he was calling me too weak to stand through a feast. He had not been dismissing me. He had been terrified, in the only language his pride would let him speak, and every careful, clumsy, over-prepared precaution in that drawer was the sound of a king trying to protect a woman he had not yet admitted he could not survive losing. I sat on that library floor for a long time with his handwriting in my lap, and something in me that had been careful for 3 weeks simply stopped being careful. If you want to know whether I actually walked into that circle with Dmitri, and whether Halvar's wolf did what I think it did in front of his entire court, stay with me to the end of this. Follow along so you do not lose the thread of what happens to a man like that when a woman he underestimated stops letting him. I found Halvar in the great hall the next morning, and for the first time since I had arrived, I did not lead with wit. "You have been protecting me since the day I got here," I said, "and calling me fragile the entire time you did it." He did not deny it. That, more than anything, told me how much ground had already shifted under him. "It was easier," he said, "to believe you were fragile. If you were fragile, I did not have to explain why losing you would put me on the floor of my own hall. I am not fragile." "I am aware," he said, and something in his voice had gone rougher, shorter, a man speaking past the edge of his own composure. "I have been aware since the library. I have simply been a coward about saying so." I had not expected the word coward out of this particular king's mouth, and I did not waste the opening. "Then stop being one. Tell your court the truth about what nearly happened to me, and why." He looked at me for a long moment. "If I name Dmitri publicly with no proof beyond a physician's word, he will call it a bride's hysteria and a king's excuse, and the treaty burns before it is a season old. Then I will need proof he cannot laugh off." That was the morning the whole shape of the thing changed for me. I was done being careful in the way I had let myself be careful. I stopped hedging my sentences at supper. I stopped pretending not to notice when his hand found the back of my chair before he caught himself and moved it. When Godwin warned me, gently, that a healer's apprentice does not go looking for a wolf king's evidence of murder, I told him I had not travelled 3 weeks and buried 1 poisoning attempt to spend the rest of my life being careful on someone else's schedule. Dmitri returned within the fortnight, this time with an escort large enough to be called an army by anyone less proud than Halvar, and a demand dressed as a courtesy. The old rites permitted any king to challenge for a claimed bride if her mate could not be shown to have properly defended his claim, and Halvar, Dmitri announced to the full hall, had let his human wife nearly die of poison under his own roof without so much as a formal accusation laid. A king who could not protect his bride, by ancient law, had not earned the keeping of her. The circle would be drawn in 3 days. Combat, by the old form, not blade against blade, but trial, the kind that tested a body's will to endure rather than its strength to strike. Halvar's champion against Dmitri's, to settle who had truly failed to protect what he claimed. Everyone in that hall assumed the champion would be Halvar. I stood before he could speak. I claimed the circle myself. The hall went the particular kind of silent that precedes either violence or history. "You cannot," Halvar said, low, only for me, his hand closing hard around the arm of his throne. "Ren, you are not a wolf. Not bred for your cold." I have heard the speech. I did not look away from him. But it was my wine that was poisoned, my body Dmitri tried to take a story out of, and I am the one who has spent 3 weeks proving to this hall that I can stand through considerably worse than a feast. Let me stand through this. Something moved behind his eyes that was not amusement this time, and was not fear either, not quite. It looked, more than anything, like a man watching his own certainty about the world quietly rearrange itself. Dimitri's toxin had been slow-acting and specific, the kind an old physician recognizes, the kind Godwin's family had studied for 3 generations because the river villages had buried enough children to it that every apprentice learned its signs before they learned to read. I had spent 9 days in that library, not only reading Halvar's letters. I had read everything Godwin owned on the old Wright trials, and learned that the challenge Dimitri had invoked was not a duel of blades at all. It was a trial of endurance against exactly that family of poison, administered to both combatants at once, the true test being who could remain standing while the other's body gave out. Dimitri had chosen the form of the challenge himself, certain that a human body, once already nearly killed by it, would fold first and fastest. He did not know I had spent a girlhood building a tolerance to it, one careful grain at a time, the way river healers have always done, quietly, generation to generation, exactly so that no king's poison would ever again decide who lived in our valleys. I did not tell Halvar this. I did not tell anyone. Some things a woman keeps for herself until the moment they matter most. The morning of the circle, the whole court gathered in the cold, breath fogging over the frost-hardened ground, and Dimitri smiled at me across the drawn line the way he had smiled at the welcome cup, certain of an ending he had already written in his head. Halvar stood at the circle's edge in his formal iron, not on the dais, close enough that I could hear him breathing. He had sworn to me the night before, hand over the old scar on his forearm, that he would not cross the line no matter what he saw. I had made him say it twice. Edric drew the boundary himself, a groove cut into frozen earth with the flat of an old blade, and read the rite aloud in a voice that carried to the back wall, that this trial belonged to endurance, not to strength, and that the old laws recognized no difference between the wolf who bled it out and the woman who simply refused to fall. I watched more than one noble's face change at that reading, as though hearing the law stated plainly made it real to them for the first time. The cup was passed. We drank together, by the old form, at the same moment, from the same vessel, so that no one could later claim foul play in the pouring. I felt it start almost at once, the cold wave, the same one that had dropped me at the feast, except this time I knew its shape and did not fight it the way panic fights. I let it move through me the way I had trained my body to let it move for 6 years, breathing into the ache instead of away from it, while across the circle Dimitri's easy smile began, very slowly, to slip. He had expected me on the ground within minutes. I did not go to the ground. By the time the sun had climbed a hand's width higher, Dimitri's knees had begun to buckle, and mine had not. And the calculation I had made walking into that circle proved out exactly the way I had built it to. His wolf blood ran hotter and faster than mine, which meant the poison moved through him hotter and faster too, and pride had made him choose a trial that punished exactly what he had never had to build: patience with his own pain. That is where the blade came in, not his choice, but mine. The old form allowed a challenger, once his opponent had visibly begun to fail, to end the trial with a blade at the throat rather than let the poison finish the work, a mercy clause dressed up as a formality nobody expected a human bride to invoke correctly. I walked to him while he swayed and set the edge of a borrowed blade beneath his jaw and did not shake. "You called me too weak to stand," I said, quiet enough that only he and the front row heard it. "I am standing. You are not." That was the moment. The blade at his throat, my hand steady, his knees betraying him in front of every wolf who had ever laughed at the rumour of a fainting bride. Somewhere behind me, I heard Halvar rise from his throne, not to stop me, because he had promised he would not, and I had made him swear it on his crown, but because some part of him could not stay seated through the ending of it. Then, something happened that no one in that circle had a story ready for. Halvar's wolf came forward, not a full shift, nothing the old laws would call dangerous, but that half-visible surge of something ancient moving just beneath a king's composed skin, and it crossed the frozen circle, past the guards, past protocol, and it lay down. At my feet, in front of the entire iron court, in front of Dimitri's own retinue, the wolf that answered to the most powerful man in that hall bowed its head to a human healer's apprentice who had just outlasted a king's poison on will alone. Halvar stood at the edge of the circle, with his hands open at his sides, looking at his own wolf on the ground in front of me. And for the first time since I had met him, I watched the proud king of the Iron Territories run entirely out of composure to spend. "Get up," I told the wolf, gently, and it did, and somehow that undid the court more thoroughly than the duel had. Dimitri was stripped of his claim to the right that same hour, his poisoning of a claimed bride now impossible to dress up as hysteria in front of 200 witnesses who had watched him fail his own trial. He left the Iron Territories that night with an escort considerably smaller than the one he had arrived with, and considerably less certain of the story he would be telling when he got home. The peace did not come free of cost. 2 of Dimitri's allied houses withdrew their envoys within the week, unwilling to be seen trading with a king whose human bride had humbled a rival before witnesses. Edric spent a fortnight managing whispers that Halvar had let his wife fight a battle that should have been his, and I heard more than once. The particular silence that follows a king into a room when his own warriors are not certain how to feel about what they watched him allow. Halvar did not apologize for it. He stood in front of his own hall and said, plainly, that he had promised his wife his stillness and had kept that promise at greater cost to his pride than any blade would have cost him, and that any wolf who thought less of him for it was welcome to say so to her face. None did. Halvar found me afterward in the library, where all the true things between us had happened. He was holding the same cracked clay cup he always drank from, instead of the finer ones the court kept trying to give him, the one I had noticed on my very first night and never asked about. "I have had gilded cups since I was crowned," he said, before I could ask. "I keep this one because it was my mother's, and it does not pretend to be anything finer than what it is." He looked at it, then at me. "I told myself, the day you arrived, that you were the fine cup and I had no business drinking from it. I have been wrong about a great many things where you are concerned. You called me too weak to stand," I said, "in front of your entire hall. I was afraid of exactly how strong you were," he said, "and it was easier to be wrong about you than to admit what losing you would cost me." He set the cup down carefully, the way I had watched him set down cups all autumn whenever he did not trust his own hands. "I am done being a coward about it. Whatever you will let me be to you, I intend to become it, publicly, at whatever cost my pride has left to pay." I did not answer with words. I answered by not stepping back when he closed the distance between us, and when he finally kissed me, careful, certain, like a man who had spent 3 weeks not letting himself believe he was allowed to. Something in my chest that had been braced since the wagon ride here simply let go. I could not have told you, after, what it felt like in any language my old life had given me. I only knew I had stopped counting the ways I might need to defend myself in that room, and started counting, instead, the ways I did not want to leave it. He claimed me before the full court 3 days later, not a quiet ceremony tucked into treaty language, but a Luna's crowning, spoken aloud, his hands steady on the old iron circlet as he set it on my head himself, in front of every noble who had once called me the fragile clause in a peace treaty. His wolf did not need to be asked twice to lie down at my feet a second time. The court, this time, did not go silent from shock. It went silent from something closer to reverence, and then, slowly, it began to bow. 6 months later, I stood in that same library with a letter from my mother in one hand and Halvar's mended cup in the other, watching frost melt off the window in a room that had stopped needing a fire lit for only one. The letter said the river villages had planted their first full harvest in a decade without a single wolf raid to break the season, and that my youngest sister wanted to know, in careful, hopeful handwriting, whether a human girl with no talent for healing might still be welcome at an iron court that no longer required its brides to bleed for their place in it. I wrote back that same evening to tell her yes, and to tell her exactly what to pack for the cold. The border villages had grain again, thanks to a treaty that finally meant what it said. Godwin had 2 new apprentices and complained about both of them constantly, which I had learned to recognise as his version of pride. Edric had stopped flinching when the court called him by his name instead of his rank, and I like to think I had something to do with that too. And the fortress, once so certain of what a human bride could and could not endure, had quietly stopped underestimating anyone who walked through its gates without a wolf's blood in her veins. I picked up my own cup, a plain one, chipped at the rim, that I had chosen on purpose from the kitchen shelf and refused every finer replacement since, and I thought about the girl who had stepped off that wagon 3 weeks into a marriage she had not asked for, certain only that she intended to survive it standing up. She had no idea, that first cold morning, that she would end up teaching a king that the strongest thing in his hall had never needed his permission to be strong. She only knew she would not fall down for anyone's convenience. I like to think she would have been pleased to know how the story ended. Do you think Dmitri ever truly believed I was as fragile as he needed me to be? Or did some part of him know the truth the whole time and gamble anyway? Tell me your theory in the comments. And if you want to stay in this world a little longer, comment the wolf and I will know exactly what you are asking for. Thank you for standing through this one with me. Wherever you are listening from tonight, welcome to the Iron Territories. Follow along for the next story from this side of the border. There are more kings in these hills who have underestimated the wrong woman, and I intend to tell you every one of their stories.